Welcome to the Page Turn podcast. I'm your host, Tori Sharp, a children's graphic novelist and literary agent.
And I'm Sydney Dean, a comics-curious illustrator for clients like Dropout TV's Dimension 20.
We're bringing you into the conversations we wish we'd had before breaking into comics, so that you'll know what to expect when taking your story from script to shelf. Episode 1, On That Comics Grind, Part 1 of a 2-part interview with Audrey Meeker. We discuss how, for people who thrive with structure, having a second job on top of making comics can provide the stability and human contact that makes it easier to make art. When did you start drawing comics? Was it early on when you first started drawing, or is it something you discovered later on in your artistic life?
So it's a combination of both. I remember distinctly when I was very, very young, probably around like 10, I really enjoyed writing my own stories. But what I would do is I would basically write a paragraph, draw an illustration to go along with that paragraph, and then write more. You could call it like an illustrated novel, so to say, is what I didn't know I was doing when I was like 10 or 11. But that was probably my first step into illustrated prose or works or comics. And then I promptly forgot that when I went to middle school and high school and stopped doing it. I definitely became more of like a illustration, realism, painter kind of girl, especially in high school, because that's just what my art program in high school allowed for. I was actually very lucky that I had a incredibly comprehensive public art program for my high school. Like, we won a lot of awards. I knew graphic novels and I loved graphic novels. And my senior year, I kind of started experimenting with comics again, but really I didn't understand what graphic novels were. And I definitely didn't know what sequential art was. But during my senior year, I went to a couple different national portfolio review events because I was waffling whether or not I wanted to be an English teacher or go to art school. And during these portfolio review events, I got such good feedback that my mom was like, "Audrey, I think it's worth it. You should go for it." And I said, "Okay." So
Wow.
we visited SCAD. We had a lovely time. SCAD was actually the only school that I visited twice, and the environment was good, and Savannah, seemed welcoming. As a student, I think it was a really good place to just be able to migrate into when you weren't in the dorms. So I decided to just do sequential art when I got to SCAD with a minor in creative writing. So it was very fine art for a lot of my formative years, but then when we got to SCAD and I started learning the foundational drawing skills of comics, that's when things really started to pick up for me and I started to actually understand what they were.
There's so much there I want to dig into. I
Sure.
think first I want to go a little more into your senior year of high school, because you mentioned that that's when comics maybe became closer into your awareness. Did you actually start drawing comics that year, or was it more that you just sort of had this seed of curiosity in your mind about them?
Well, I would say a combination of both. Like, one of my portfolio pieces was this weird mixed media 3D painting that had different panels and speech balloons actually jutting out from it. So it basically was a comic page, but formatted kind of strangely. Mixed media and supposed to be, I don't obviously believe this, but an attempt to be quote unquote more high form or like high art than what a traditional comic page would be. At least that's what my 18-year-old self was trying to do. But I would say that I was definitely just reading more comics. Like, I read Faith Erin Hicks. The first book that I read of hers that I really loved was Friends with Boys.
We haven't released the interview that I did as like a host introduction yet, but I mentioned Friends with Boys as the first comic that I found too, or the first one that
OMG.
really stuck out with me. That's incredible. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was just so good to me because it actually had a good plot, but also like elements of romance, and the art was really intriguing. It was really palatable. I don't know if you ever read this, but like the first ever graphic novel that I read was Rapunzel's Revenge. I don't know the author's name. Those two books brought me into comics. Because then when I went to art school, I was like, oh, I know what graphic novels are now. I'm just going to buy every one that I see in sight and continue educating myself from beyond the classroom.
How did you find those comics, both Friends with Boys and Rapunzel's Revenge?
Rapunzel's Revenge was the library. Friends with Boys, I was a frequenter of my local Barnes and Noble growing up. I loved buying books. So me and my two other bookish friends would just always go, and we didn't always necessarily buy anything, but I do remember opening that book and being like, oh yeah, no, this is coming home with me.
Mhm. You talked a bit about the story, but was there anything about the art of those books that caught you right away?
Well, for Faith Erin Hicks, it was definitely the art that caught me, and then the story followed suit. Her tremendous like ink work and how she renders characters and like her little blushy lines, all of these really interesting things that she has acquired throughout her time making comics. The art definitely came first. Rapunzel's Revenge, it was definitely the story. The story had like an enemies to lovers arc, and I was like 11, so I was like, oh, this is great. So for Faith and Aaron Hicks, it was art first, story later. For Rapunzel's Revenge, it was story first, art later for me.
Cool.
Hmm.
So I'm going to jump to when you started at SCAD. When you entered SCAD, your first week there, did you have an idea of what you wanted to major in?
I always knew in my heart. Well, here's the thing. I said from day one, didn't even go to the majors and minors fair. I said from day one, I was going to be a sequential art major. But I don't think I truly understood the grasp of what sequential art was. I just enjoyed my time so much in the sequential art department that I don't think I was properly prepared for how much I would enjoy it, as well as the work that comes from it. My mind was definitely opened when I got into those first like Seeker 100 classes.
I'm glad it didn't put you off of comics, that it was harder than you expected.
Yeah.
It sounds like you found a really deep love for them
Hmm.
simultaneously, right? Like you're saying that you enjoyed it right away. Can you talk about that? Like, what was the feeling of discovering this love for comics while you were at SCAD?
One of my big motivators, at least when I was a student, was in like positive competitiveness. Like I learned very quickly that like comics, you have to get your point across, and if you're not getting your point across well, then you're not succeeding. Being able to visually tell a story and being able to communicate your point through like shot calls and dialogue, maybe an absence of dialogue, maybe the panel is just black, you know, that and being in that environment with peers is what really pushed me to enjoy it. This is going to make me sound like a brown nose, but I really, really, really enjoyed just like walking into critique day and being like, I think I did the absolute best that I could have. And I'm so excited to show my peers what I did. And I'm so excited to see what my peers did. And I'm excited to get critique, and I'm excited to critique people's work. We'll get into this later, but like my love of critiquing actually founded me a job as an assistant editor at a comics publisher post grad. I got very lucky, I think, with the people I was in classes with, because as I was going through my time at SCAD, I really found the people who pushed me and would give me feedback, and we all just got better together.
The way that you were talking about the excitement of finding that like camera angles and shot calls and different drawing techniques all factor into comics suddenly made a connection in my mind, because the way you spoke about making comics didn't sound that different from mixed media.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there's a connection there?
I mean, probably. I feel like all of your experience kind of builds upon each other. You probably wouldn't classify like pencil and paper as mixed media anymore, but like I wanted to be a traditional comic artist for a very long time. But during my sophomore year, I kind of realized that that wasn't quite the path for me. But I think it all just came down to experimentation. That's like the through line through it all, is just like trying something and seeing if it worked. And if it didn't, you would get feedback and you would move on, you know? Like,
Yes, experimentation is a great word for it. I
mm-hmm,
think what I was trying to dig down to is that obviously comics, as we're describing them, ink on paper or digital ink on paper,
mm-hmm,
are not truly mixed media, but it feels like you were drawing maybe from your skills as a mixed
mm-hmm,
media artist in
mm-hmm,
your earlier education and bringing that sense of experimentation into comics.
mm-hmm,
And I went through the same program as you at SCAD.
mm-hmm,
Um, we didn't overlap in the years that we were there,
mm-hmm,
but we went through a similar curriculum.
mm-hmm.
And I saw some people slide into making comics pretty smoothly, and some people really struggle with it. So when you were describing this, I was wondering what made it able to be such a positive experience for you, something exciting and seamless. And I'm wondering if it's this sense of experimentation and curiosity.
I'm sure those are factors to it, but I think for the most part, it's just like my directness as a person. I'm also a very visual person, so I think that definitely lended me to taking to comics super well. Not to say that every first idea is a good idea, but I definitely can just like see things in my head and then execute them. A lot of people can't visualize things in their brain, which is very interesting, but I can, like the whole like gold star apple test where you visualize something.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah, I think the combination of being very visual learning leaning, as well as having a little bit of self confidence and also just being a direct with my intention. I think that all allowed me to jump into comics pretty easily.
Yeah, what makes each of us strong in comics is a combination of our interests, our
Mm-hmm.
innate personality, and our developed skills. And you had
Mm-hmm.
these interests in various kinds of art and visual execution. And then you also had this desire to be an English teacher for a while, which connects to critique and editing, right? So it feels like we can enter into comics from many different angles. And for
Mm-hmm.
you, you had sort of a perfect storm of all of these various things that made it
Mm-hmm.
possible for you to become adept both as a creator and in this assistant editing role that we'll get to.
For me, if I didn't go to school for comics, I wouldn't have been able to do it because I thrived in structure. I also thankfully got close to a couple of the professors that really pushed me, like John Lowe. I don't know if you ever had classes with him. He and I really got along, and he really didn't mince his words with things. And like him, and then Kate Sharon, and then more of the professors were definitely good to me.
That's so cool. John was one of the only ones I didn't have when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to take his classes. My best friend from college attributes like so much of what she learned in school to his classes. And then
Mm-hmm.
Kate wasn't there when I was there. So
Yeah.
I never had the opportunity. And I had some excellent, just absolutely fantastic sequential art teachers while I was there too, but they were different than the ones who
Mm-hmm.
you remember. I think that my classes with Brian Ralph made probably the biggest impact on me. So many of them were really good. I took electives with Ralph about cartooning,
Mm.
and it was the first time in my life I realized I could actually be funny, and that made
Mm.
a significant impact on my life and career.
Mm-hmm.
Considering that like my most recent book is about kids who want to be comedians,
Mm-hmm.
like it
Mm-hmm.
became like a huge interest for me, and it was just such a fun class. I just wanted to take it over and over again. And SCAD doesn't really afford you that most of the time. I don't know actually if I know anyone who like retook a class just out of interest in taking it again. Not like retaking it for the grade, but retaking it because they loved it, which I've heard at other schools is more common. Like people can audit a class again or just retake it if they want to like learn more about it. But in SCAD, it was like you only really get a few electives the entire time you're there. So it becomes very precious about which classes you choose. And then taking extra classes becomes extremely expensive.
Yeah. To go to the expensive part, I think the only way that SCAD would allow you to kind of stack or retake classes is if you go the MFA route and you take the MFA version of those same classes, which is really expensive. My friend Sarah is doing it right now. Sarah Davidson. She's also a very talented cartoonist.
She was your colorist, right?
Yep, she was my colorist. She's going to be my colorist for Last One Picked, and she also has her debut series called Jackson's Wilder Adventures coming out through Mad Cave. And she also got a couple more deals, which is really exciting and well-deserved. I am very fortunate that art school was feasible for me and my family because I don't think I would have been able to become the artist I am today without it. So
that's fantastic. Yeah, I know a lot of other people had very mixed experiences in art school, which I like to represent. I think it probably wasn't the best choice for me just because of like physical and mental health issues I was having at the time, where taking it like more slowly and more gently might have been better for my well-being overall, even though I'm really grateful for what I learned there and the people I met. But I'm really glad we can have you on to give this separate experience of just having what sounds like a really great time generally in art school and being very pro SCAD.
Well, pro SCAD is different than pro sequential art department.
True, yeah. Fair enough.
Because I don't know, and maybe you've explained it in your other podcast episodes. How did you break into comics? Like, because obviously you went to SCAD, but I was wondering, your first book came out a couple of years ago, right? Or just a year ago?
It came out in 2021. Yeah.
Okay, so a few years ago. When did you sell that book?
I sold that book in 2019 and I got my agent in 2018, and I had graduated from SCAD in 2016.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool. And I'm assuming you just kind of like made comics in addition to potential pitch packets, just like made comics for funsies in the middle of there, or?
Yes, I made some zines. I was in a couple of small anthologies that actually other SCAD students put together after we graduated. And I had a couple of webcomics in the interim. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Did you query your agent, or did they discover you?
I queried him, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was regular slush pile, just a cold email. And, yeah.
Okay, cool. I was just curious. Because literary agents are very nice to have.
They absolutely are. And I'd love to get to that in your story too. So you were at SCAD, and then what happened after? Which came first, your assistant editing role or your agent and publishing side of things?
So my agent came first. Basically what happened was my junior year, we go online for COVID. You know, that summer I'm at home wilting away, but still trying to make comics because for those listening at home, SCAD has a annual event in the spring called Editors Day, where they bring a lot of different editors from different publishers and they essentially review student portfolios and pitch packets for graphic novels. My junior year, submitted a pitch packet for my now second book, Last One Picked. The Last One Picked was actually the first idea that I had, but it wasn't the first idea that sold, which is actually very interesting. But basically, I submitted this pitch packet to all the editors. I got reviews with various ones, but Scholastic emails me one-on-one before the event even happens and is like, hey, I love this idea. Do you have more of it? I'd love to talk to you about it more. And I said, oh, I was on a walk, but okay. So
wait, did you get a cold call, you're saying, or was this over email?
A cold email, I guess. So I had my portfolio review with her. It went super well. And I basically then made the promise to send her updated works throughout the summer. And I also participated in a pitching event called PitMad, on formerly known as Twitter, now X, and RIP, whatever. I get interest from a good amount of agents and a couple editors, but mostly agents. And so then I query them. And I only queried like 3 or 4. And the person I queried initially, her name is Molly O'Neill. She is a literary agent at Root Literary, but she passed my pitch packet onto her peer, Melanie, and she then, this is like the first like couple weeks of my fall quarter now at SCAD, but she offered me representation after sitting down and talking to me and talking about my future ideas together.
Was
So,
Melanie also at Root Literary, or was this?
yes, Melanie was also at Root Literary. So, this is now my senior year, and we go through revisions for Last One Picked, and then we submit exclusively to Scholastic. And they're not super happy with a couple story angles that I was taking, because Last One Picked is a story about the discussion of body dysmorphia in young female athletes, specifically in volleyball, because that's what I played growing up, and it pulls a lot from my own experiences. And one of those initial experiences was a doctor basically like body shaming me. And I wanted to include something like that because that's, hey, that's not uncommon for a
Mm-hmm.
doctor to do that, especially to young women. But Scholastic didn't like that angle. So they eventually passed on the project. And I was like, okay. So me and Melanie then reshifted our attention. And at this time, I was taking the pitch class with Ray Godo. And then I developed my pitch packet for Swing in it. Me and Melanie worked on Swing together. And then,
Wait, this is so cool. Were you like developing this pitch in class and going back and forth with your agent at the same time about it?
so for Swing, so I was essentially working on 2 different pitch packets concurrently. So
Okay.
my first pitch packet for Last One Picked was the one that I was discussing with my agent and Scholastic. And then very shortly after, I then started working on my pitch packet for Swing in class. And this is now winter quarter. All that stuff with Scholastic and Last One Picked happened in fall. And then in winter, I did the pitch with Ray Goda, where I developed the pitch for Swing. And I was working on my agent with Swing together.
One more thing. Were you back at SCAD in Savannah at this point, or were you still online?
So I was technically in the dormitories, but the classes were online.
Oh,
I,
wow.
I,
Okay.
yeah, me and my roommate, we knew that we would not do well if we stayed at home while trying to be in class. So it was an option for SCAD students to go back to the dormitories because they also said that it was so scummy, not a SCAD fan. They basically were just like, if you stay home after the second quarter we're online, you basically have to go back to full tuition prices. So we're just like, oh, we're just going to go back to the dorms then. And thankfully there was space for it, and we got to have the same dorm that we had our junior year. Basically, I would just be on Zoom classes with my roommate, and like we would take breaks together and I don't know, have Zoomies in the hallway, and then we'd go back to our classes.
Were you able to access any of the facilities? Because I remember that when I was at SCAD, even being able to use the computer lab and print things, and they had like full rooms of Cintiqs, like the big Wacom display tablets, that helped make the cost of tuition feel a bit more worth it. So were you able to use the labs or go into the class buildings at all that year?
Nope.
Wow.
We
Okay.
were able to go in our spring quarter.
Okay.
But thankfully for our case, because sequential art and my roommate's case illustration actually translated super well online. Because most people were working digitally now, anyways, and it's just like throw your picture up on a screen and like share with everyone, and it works out fine. Like the industrial design kids, I don't even know what happened to them.
Even
They
in
probably,
fashion, they
yeah.
relied pretty heavily on being able to use the mannequins and the big drafting tables and the sewing machines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's rough. I don't disagree with the decision not to let people into these buildings in,
Mm-hmm.
early 2021. And it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense that by spring, when it was pretty universal that people were getting vaccinated, that they'd be able to open up the buildings again. But
Mm-hmm.
that is still so rough. That really sucks.
Yeah, I'm assuming a lot of people took gap years for the
Yeah.
majors that were most like heavily impacted. It was interesting because my COVID senior year was definitely a lot of like rapid change and hard work because there was nothing else I could do. I couldn't go outside. I couldn't party with anyone. I could barely even get a cup of coffee if I wanted to. So I basically was just like kind of quote unquote forced to grind away. So I think that's what led to early career strides, which was like getting a literary agent into my junior year and senior year, and then working on pitches and like getting those out into the world and everything. So it was like good for me from a foundational career level because it really started everything, it sparked everything. But it was really difficult mentally because there was no socialization
Besides hallway zoomies.
besides
Yeah.
always zoomies. So for me, going back to the thing that sparked this all, I think it was like literary agent and pitch came first, and then for editors day senior year, I sent my pitch packet. I submitted it to a bunch of editors. For the ones that showed interest, my agent sent them a official submission, and funnily enough, Rachel Dybel, who is an editor, she is someone I didn't know previously, and she was the one most interested in swing.
And that was an agent submission. So your
Yep.
agent sent that. Okay, great.
Another thing I was doing the last 2/3 of my senior year was that I was doing a 4-credit internship, editorial internship for a company called Valiant Entertainment. I don't associate myself with them now. They were like doing NFTs and stuff when I worked
Mm.
there, and I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting. I thought
Mm.
we were making comics." But that wasn't my decision. That was kind of a Valiant's parent company's decision, I think.
Mm.
I don't really understand it. I started working at Valiant remotely. And then, like a month later, I sold Swing to Rachel. This is now September or so of 2021. And then I only worked at Valiant for about a year.
So that
Um,
was after your internship? Like you got a role
mhm,
at Valiant?
mhm, yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I worked there for about a year. And then I got laid off in addition to like 4 other people got laid off. Um, and there was only like 11 people at the company. So I was like, oh, this is crazy.
They didn't make enough NFT money, I guess.
No, they surely didn't. I saw someone sent me a little job posting that they had online. This was months ago, but it was like AI video editor. And I was like,
Oh,
well, why do
no.
you need the video editor then if you're going to use AI? Like, it
Yeah.
seems a little bit counterintuitive. Anyways, I don't know what they're doing. But it did give me a remote job within my interest for about a year, which was a good steady paycheck as I was working on Swing. But at the end of the day, I'm very glad that I no longer worked there because after I got laid off, I had to get a job and reintegrate myself into society because I was the youngest person there by like 20 years. And so I kind of just am like, yeah, I just have to meet people and have a job and like be normal again instead of a cave dweller.
Do you mind sharing what job you got next?
Oh yeah, so I started working at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started working as a barista at Starbucks. I have been at the same store for like 2 years now. I work as a shift supervisor now, which is actually a very good, significant pay increase. But basically, I go in, I get my 30 hours a week, I have my 3-day weekend, and I work on comics. And I get health insurance and benefits, and I have a 401k, and I get to sell stocks from Starbucks.
Sounds
Do
like it's
that.
been good for you.
Yeah, through it, I met some of my closest friends that I have now.
Is your third book, is it about coffee?
Yeah, it's about baristas.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um,
also worked as a barista in college
where?
at Arts Cafe. Arts
Okay.
Cafe, yeah. Right across from Hayman's Hall. I wish I could have worked at one of the cooler ones, but I opted for a student work study because I had a friend who was working at Arts Cafe, and he's like, I could totally get you a job. And I was like, okay. So I
Oh,
did that.
nice.
Yeah. It was very good. But it would have been fun to go to one of the, like, Sentient Bean or Foxy Loxy or whatever.
I feel like in talking to you, you figured out some things that it took me longer to figure out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I look back at college, and the number one thing I regret is that I didn't have a part time job, which I
Mm-hmm.
know art school is like super deadline heavy and sometimes it gets really busy, but I could have done it. I spend a lot of nights staying up way too late watching Doctor Who. Like, I probably
Mm-hmm.
had the time to have a job. I would work all summer, I would nanny, I would get
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of money that I would try to save for the rest of the year. But there was definitely one year where I got to like end of finals week, spring quarter, was heading home with like $30 in my bank account, you
Mm.
know? And it would have been nice to have a little bit more flexibility to be able to like do things with friends while I was at school or just save up for life after college.
Mm-hmm.
But this, what you're talking about with reintegrating into society, obviously that's COVID related in your story, which wasn't the case when I was that
Mm-hmm.
age. But I was so socially anxious. I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, it was, there's a flavor of social anxiety. It's called something a little different that comes from being on the autism spectrum. And I was deep in that when I was that age. I found it so hard to talk to people. And then when I moved out to Seattle and started working in a coffee shop because I knew no one here pretty much and I wanted to get to know just my neighbors and everything, it like fixed it
Mm-hmm.
somehow. I
Mm-hmm.
just learned how to talk to people and realized I wasn't as weird or off putting as I had thought I was when I was younger. So it's a very healing experience to work in a cafe for a couple of years and just like realize how nice it is to talk to people.
Mm-hmm. I definitely attribute a lot of my social skills to working at Arts Cafe in Savannah, Georgia. Because, like, when it's slow, you also have to talk to your coworkers, or else it's going to be miserable. And so, just like being able to have the skill to talk to your coworkers and then talk to customers, and then you get your regulars. Like, I have like five or
Mm-hmm.
six regulars at the Starbucks that I work at now that will like pull me aside and be like, "Hey, how are you?" And I was like, "I'm good. Thanks for asking,
Yeah.
Jamie. Thanks for asking, Peyton."
Shout out Jamie. Shout out Peyton.
Yeah. Very near and dear to my heart. It definitely brightens your day a little bit. There are many times where I wish that I could integrate, like, I wish that I could work at a different coffee shop in Athens because there's a lot of really cool ones here. But the problem is that as like an actual like adult, Starbucks has so many benefits, especially if I continue to work with the company. But especially now, I'm just like, I need to get to know my community because Athens is really cool. It's not quite as art centered as Savannah, and it's not quite as big as Columbus, Ohio, which is where I'm from originally. But it's important to be inspired by real life. And that is to have a brief interlude of talking about advice to young creatives. You
Please,
have you
yeah.
have to pull from your real life experience. Literally all three of my books are my lived experience, and I think that that brings the most flavor and strength of story, especially in its most foundational aspects. So being able to just quote unquote live life is important. I mean, especially even if it's something like a forced living, like you have to go out and you have to make money and you have to meet people and talk to people because it's your job or your school or whatever. Like, sometimes it's worth putting yourself in trickier situations in order to learn from those experiences and then make a comic about it. Like swing, I did swing dancing in college. I really liked it, and then I made a book about it. Last one picked. I played volleyball throughout my entire life, had some feelings about it, made a book about it. And then for Grounds, I work as a barista, and I wanted to make a comic about baristas and Ohio, which is where I'm from. Obviously, there's more of those stories, but like my lived experience brings life to them. Anyways, interlude over.
No, that's fantastic. I work with a lot of writers because I'm a literary agent, and I've also run critique groups for my whole life. And you get faced with this emotion a lot from writers where they feel like they should be writing all the time. If they're not writing, they're wasting their time. And there's also an element to this career where you make as much money as you're able to write. So you feel like an intense pressure to be writing and drawing all the time. And I always am trying to remind myself and other people that doing other things is writing. Like going on a walk is writing, going swing dancing is writing, which is something we have in common. And part of why I was so excited to interview you, because I was an officer of the SCAD swing dance club before you went to college there. So it's really nice to see that the club is still going strong. So I think that's fantastic advice. We should not shy away from other life experiences in service of making our books, because we need to live in order to have things to write about.
I don't know who said this once, but there is one podcast with one cartoonist who basically was just like, I schedule fun time into my schedule to go do things that I like. And they were talking about like a pottery class or whatever. And I'm about to start doing that too, because we're trying to live life here, not trying to be a hermit in a shell of a person.
Thank you for listening to the Page Turn podcast. Your hosts are Tori Sharp and Sydney Dean. You can find out more about this podcast and our guests in the show notes or at torisharp.com/podcast. The theme music is Would You Please Wake Up by Patricia Taxon.
Would you please wake up, my dearest love? No one has told me that I'll be okay yet today. No one has called me a beautiful girl yet today.